Welcome, everybody. I'm Sherry Branson, Marketing Manager for Kevin Davis Insurance, and welcome to the Marcus Hour, episode number 22. And our speakers today need no introduction. We have not one, but two father-son duos. We have Stephen and Jake Marcus of Alcock and Marcus of Braintree, Massachusetts, and Kevin Davis and Eric Davis of Kevin Davis Insurance. Today we have a great topic for you all. It's beyond the typical policy, a deep dive into risk and protection for community associations. I'm now joined by Jake Marcus. Hi, Jake.
Hey, Sherry.
How are you?
Good, good. How are you?
Doing well. We have a great topic today, Jake. We have great speakers. We're going to talk about legal and insurance aspects regarding community associations, the claims that you're seeing, etc. So take it away.
All right, absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Sherry. Sherry is the marketing manager for Kevin Davis Insurance. Has been there for 19 years, and we want to give a special shout out to Kevin Davis Insurance Company or Insurance Services because it is their 25th year anniversary. So congratulations to Kevin and his team, Sherry, Eric. All of you have done a fantastic job, and we are proud to be a small part of all you have achieved in your 25 years.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
And uh, Kevin Davis, Insurance Services, is in LA, so I know that you all fared fairly well with the devastating fires in LA, but we certainly want to send out our thoughts and prayers to all the people who were affected. It's just all tragic.
Yeah.
But
We both had some scary times that in like a 3 day, in a 24-hour period, it went from Eric's neighborhood to my neighborhood, and we both looking out and had some sleepless nights there, but we're all okay, and we didn't have to evacuate or anything, but it was tough. It was tough times. So thanks.
Absolutely. And I think that is obviously Kevin Davis Insurance Services is based in California, Los Angeles, California. And a lot of what we're going to discuss today is how insurance, the different types of specific insurance, but one of the things we'll touch on, I think, is that insurance can be a very nationwide approach. What happens in one jurisdiction, you may say, oh, that shouldn't affect us. Where in Massachusetts, Kevin and his team and Eric and his team are in California. Things that happen in either jurisdiction shouldn't affect you, but that's a misconception. And a lot of what we've seen, I practice in Florida as well, and we see a lot of events there that kind of can cause a trickle effect to the insurance market. So we'll definitely get to that. But without further ado, I do want to get into, the what we're actually going to talk today because we do have a lot to cover. Just as a housekeeping item, if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Feel free to send those out. We will be sure, if we don't address them during the 1 hour today, we will be sure to send out a follow-up that has answers as best we can address them. But yeah, we're going to get into Kevin Davis Insurance Services, Travelers. Kevin is also the managing general agent for Travelers. And we're going to kind of get into the specialty insurance coverage that their team offers. And that includes the condominium and community associations that they cover and insure. And we were talking before, we think it's around 40,000 community associations, but that may have rose in the even just during this webinar. So
We can only hope, right?
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Hopefully we have some sign up.
As Bernie Gitlin used to tell me when if a client would ask if they or a potential customer would ask them if they could get a policy, he said, "You're just in luck. We just happen to have one policy left." So soon next year, 40,000 will be millions and millions like McDonald's. But yeah, more importantly is they have a superb form of coverage for community associations. And Jake, do you want me to quickly get into the why on directors and officers insurance?
Yeah, and I think just as one more broad kind of touch point before we get into the more specifics of the program, we're going to get very deep into it today. yeah, we're going to be covering the types of insurance that you should have outside of general liability insurance. This will include directors and officers, crime, umbrella, errors and omissions, which Kevin and Eric will be able to address in more detail than you'll probably want to know, but it'll be important to know and important to be appraised of. It will also get into the different types of claims. This could include breach of fiduciary duty, discrimination, defamation, breach of contract, and many more. But we'll get into all of that. And without further ado, I will push it over to Stephen, and a partner with our or of counsel, actually.
Low man on the totem pole.
I know. So Stephen and Kevin.
I'm not even sure I can say that anymore, but whatever the expression is these days.
Yeah, well, you're good to go. So we'll get into beyond the typical policy, a deep dive into risk and protection for community associations. Stephen, he is on the insurance task force in New England, has taken a approach in the later stages of his career, as I'll put it, to really focus on insurance and community associations. He's still a young cat, but he's getting more seasoned. So we're giving him more specifics to focus on now. So Stephen, without further ado.
Okay, next slide, Jake. Well, the first slide. So I'm going to briefly, I know none of you who know me will believe that I really will be brief, but I'm going to try to be, on why associations should have directors and officers liability insurance. So the first concern is, so you get on the board, be a great way to get to know your neighbors, and look good on your resumes, and none of that's really true. And then you get into it, and if you have a 500 unit condominium and or 100 unit condominium, and each unit is worth 500,000, if I can do the math, is that $50 million? But to me, you're running a multi-million-dollar business, and you're also the condominium business, and you're also operating a multi-million-dollar piece of real estate. So the first thing that you find out is, well, gee, as board members, since we don't get paid, typically, almost all unit owner board members are volunteers, is, well, I can't get sued personally, can I? And unfortunately, and it's probably something to say about the legal profession, but in almost every lawsuit that we see, especially ones where there's anger on the part of the unit owner who's upset with whatever they don't like that the board's doing, that if a lawsuit is filed after a claim, it almost always will be against the association and against each board member personally. And in Massachusetts, anyway, we've had one case like 40 years ago that got close to finding personal liability. And then on appeal, they took that away. So typically personal liability you're not going to find liability, but it's very common that you're going to get personally sued. And we typically would move to dismiss that count and say that the claim is really against the association. But the real reason that you want to have directors and officers liability insurance and have a good policy, which is broader in coverage, is that the condominium documents almost always say that the board's members, that the owners will indemnify the board, that the association will indemnify the board. If we mess up, don't worry about it. The whole community will chip in to make sure that you don't have any monetary impact on yourself personally as a board member. Now, we like to see, just on indemnification clauses, we'd prefer to see that they say defend and indemnify the board, because I think indemnification technically is probably paying after there's a judgment, whereas defense starts on day one, and legal defense, and even of claims that aren't strong claims, and indemnification is the payment of those claims. So the need for D&O is that if you have a $3 million suit, and there's a judgment against you, the D&O is needed to have the funds to defend and indemnify the board, so that each unit owner isn't assessed for its share of the $3 million judgment, for example. So D&O is a type of malpractice policy, protects board members and associations against claims that the board didn't do its job. And it doesn't matter if the claim is not correct. The board still needs the insurance for the defense, even on questionable claims. And people do get upset. They send in demand letters, and they want the board to open up the pool. Why'd you close the pool? Well, it was the beginning of the pandemic, and it was for everybody's safety. Well, I don't care. I bought here wanting a swimming pool, and you didn't give it to me. You should have done whatever it took to make sure the pool was open. You breached your fiduciary duty. So that's why you need the D&O coverage. And then the question becomes, how much insurance should you have for D&O and even for your in umbrella coverage? And my mentor was Bernie Gitlin, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago. And his question, when I said, well, gee, should an association get $1 million or $5 million or $10 million? It was right after the Caesar's Palace fire, which dates both at least myself and Bernie at the time. It goes way, way back, but there were claims for millions. And Bernie said the answer is, how much can you afford? That there's no real number in terms of how much insurance you should get. Basically, it's a question of how much can you get sued for. Maybe Kevin and Eric can talk about that a little bit, but I want to turn it over to them to go into what the difference is between different D&O policies. For example, there are policies that are part of a package policy that an insurer gives, but then there are standalone or monoline policies that are specific and have enhanced coverage for condominiums and community associations. And I want to turn it over to Kevin and Eric to go over those issues and what you should be looking for in a policy. Kevin or Eric?
No, I'm going to take this one actually, but I want to thank you guys both for having us on. Definitely a great relationship with your firm, and it's an honor to be part of your Marcus Hour. So thank you for having us on as your guest.
We're honored to have you. Honored to have you.
So, similar to, exactly to echo what Steve was talking about, not all D&O policies for community associations are created equal. There are a lot of different options out there, but we're going to talk about 3 specific ones. The first is going to be, and I'm going to rank them actually from least valuable to most valuable when it comes to addressing coverage. The first type is going to be the kind of one that Steve just mentioned, your standard package D&O policy. This is not a standalone policy. It usually covers your basic D&O insurance needs and doesn't cover any of the items usually listed at below on this slide, which are extremely important for associations. This policy is normally the quickest and least expensive option, though, because it's usually added to a much larger insurance policy. This is the policy you want if you just want to check a box that shows you have D&O coverage. That's essentially what this is doing. The next one I want to talk about is your private/nonprofit D&O policy. This is the standalone policy, much better. It covers much of the D&O exposure that an organization might face. However, right there lies the issue. This policy is designed for a multitude of entities. It's not necessarily for associations specifically. They cover charitable organizations, they do museums, they do cultural centers. They're not specifically designed for associations, so they're still missing some of the key issues that associations need to have covered. For example, like insured versus insured, breach of contract, they don't cover property managers usually. And in most situations, you need to buy a separate employment practices liability policy. So it's not something that would be covered under the like it wouldn't be something that's packaged with the D&O the way this next one I'm going to speak about is. And that is your specific HOA condo D&O policy. This is the gold standard for your D&O when it comes to covering your association. It's a standalone policy that's truly designed to understand the fundamental differences that associations have from other entities. This is the type of policy, when you have a good one, that should cover all the items below and more. And they should have everything from great claims handling to attorneys like the amazing ones we have on this panel that only do HOA condo business, because you don't want, adjusters that are doing GL claims, that are doing, wind and hail type stuff. And you don't want attorneys that are doing IPOs, but also trying to litigate and do HOA condo business. They don't match up. So when you get a really great policy, with those things, with that policy also comes the experience and knowledge that you're working with the very best people in the industry. So this is the type of policy you want when you're looking to truly have your association covered. So those are definitely the three types that are out there. And, you can rank them where you want to, but the last one is definitely where you want to have if you're looking to have your association covered.
Yeah, and I would say one jump in there, Eric, is that, and Steve, you said it last time, how much can you afford? And that's what we're talking about here is affordability. The easiest thing to do is to spend a couple $100 getting a package, or a couple $100 more and get a standalone policy that doesn't pick up. When you talk about the difference between a D&O policy for community association, any other D&O policy, there are three things we're going to talk about. Number one, look at the insuring agreement. In a D&O for insuring agreement for a community association, we will say it pays loss because of a claim, number one, because of a claim for a wrongful act, number two, made against the insured. Simple as that. Claim for a wrongful act against the insured. That is, you have a community association D&O policy. If you have a package policy, they will say legally obligated to pay because a suit for damages from a wrongful act against the insured. So right off the bat there, you're talking about two specific things. You want a D&O policy that picks up claims versus a D&O policy that picks up suit for damages. Because we're going to talk later is that the majority of the claims that we see are not suit for damages, they are claims. So number one, you got to look at an insuring agreement and make sure it's a claim for a wrongful act against the insured. Now, once you get that, you go to step number two, and you got to figure out what those three things mean: claim, wrongful act, and insured. So when we talk about what is a claim, it is a written demand for monetary or non-monetary relief. So if I live in a condominium association and I park in visitors parking, I park there all the time, but the board is hassling me on it, I can make a demand that says, listen, I demand you stop and refund all the fines you paid back. That's a monetary demand. There's a written demand for monetary damages. Written demand for non-monetary damages is the same thing. I don't want anybody. I just want you to stop harassing me. So a written demand is a claim. Also a civil proceeding. So a suit for damages is a claim. So now we got two as a claim. The third one is criminal proceedings. Now it's interesting, when we talk about criminal proceedings, how is that possible? About 40 years ago, and we talked about things that happened a long time ago, is we had a lawsuit in New York City where the board was found criminally negligent because they did not install the window guards properly. So criminal complaints, formal administrative proceedings, Fair Housing Act claims. So it's right off the bat. There's a difference between a suit for damages and a claim. A claim is four parts to it: monetary, non-monetary, civil proceedings, criminal complaints, and administrative proceedings. That right there is a huge difference, because when we live in a condo world, your claims are going to come in all those areas. So you need more than suit for damages. So you got a claim, is everything. I mean, we're not missing anything, Number two, what is a wrongful act? Now, it's interesting. If you look at a D&O policy, they have a paragraph 5, 6 different words, 5 different sentences about a wrongful act. It says any act, error, omission, misstatements, misleading statement, lie, it goes on. But the first 2 words are any act. That's it. You don't need anything else after you say any act. Any act. That's all. But they spell out what act means, all that. No. So you got what is a claim? Written demand, all that stuff. And a DNO is a wrongful act policy, and it says 2 words. First 2 words, any act. Any act. So now who's an insured in the policy? Well, your current board of directors is an insured. And your past board members are also insured. But everybody else is insured who's acting at the direction of the board. That means your committee members, your volunteers, your employees, the spouse of employees, the spouse of the board of directors. So anybody acting at the direction of the board, it's pretty much covered on your DNO policy as long as they act in that capacity. So it has to be acting in a capacity as a committee member or a board member, because in condo worlds, you're going to have 2 board members. You can have a board member not liking the next door neighbor. And we see these things because those wind chimes that blow at 3 o'clock in the morning, and the board member will come out and remove it. And he says, acting in his capacity as a board member, no, he's just annoying. He's just an annoying next door neighbor. So it's about capacity, okay? And it's about acting in the direction of the board if you're not a board member. So if you look at a DNO contract, okay, we're looking at something that is incredibly broad. It is covering, again, a claim, which is, just a written demand. Just here you go, you're acting up, I don't like what you're doing, you breach your fiduciary duty. You are insured because you're everybody, and it's a wrongful act as any act. That is the problem, because now everything's covered in there. So the most important thing is what's excluded under the DNO policy. And when we talk about exclusions comes into 4 areas. Okay, every exclusion on a DNO is 4 areas you got to be concerned about. Number 1 is eliminate coverage for uninsurable items. Certain things you can't insure for, like war and nuclear and a whole list of things you can't, terrorism, those kind of things. Eliminate coverage that's provided elsewhere, like bodily injury and property damage, pollution coverage. It's coverages that are not designed for the DNOs, designed to be picked over someplace else. You do it there. Now, the third one is interesting, and that is coverage due to conduct or behavior, meaning that I am not entitled. We as board members can go out to and have a celebrate our party, or guess what? We're going to start paying ourselves because we've been doing this for 20 years. We're going to pay ourselves. So it's things that legally entitled to do, and there's exclusions for that too. However, the most important part about that is that we don't decide if you did something wrong or not. The judge decides. So you get defense costs until you determine it, because it's against the law to discriminate. So I can't say that Jake and Steve discriminated. All I can say is that, hey, let the judge determine discrimination, and then there can be coverage. You can't provide coverage for breach of contract because they enter into a contract and just say, I'm not going to pay it anymore. That's not, it's against public policy. So what you can do is provide defense for these kind of coverages. So when looking at DNO coverages, it makes sense for the exclusions to be there. So here's the most important part is that to make coverage cheap. So we go back to Eric's first example that's in the packages. We have a whole list of exclusions. Then for the next coverages, the private nonprofit, we exclude things, because the reality is this: you can get a policy, a DNO policy, for a couple $100, or you can get a policy for a couple $1,000 that provides the protection that the board needs. And what I've been doing for probably about 40 years now is providing one type of coverage that is designed for community associations, and is based on the fact that we look at community associations and we get the lawsuits coming in and say, oh, wow, the DNO policy is supposed to cover that. And we make decisions, say yes or no. If it's yes, we cover it. We say no, we will put an exclusion in the future to make sure that things are not covered. So right now, we're continuing to look at this new generation of claims that we're seeing and saying, wait a minute, what do we want to do here in terms of post-COVID world? We're seeing a lot of post-COVID world type claims, because guess what's happened? At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Jake, you're sitting at home and Steve's sitting at home, and we're trying to have this conversation, and a guy playing pickleball outside, or he's smoking underneath your window, and he's doing these things that wasn't done before. And so we're looking at those kind of things and saying, okay, how do we handle those? Or legislative issues that's happening in Florida right now, or reserve studies that have to be taken care of. How do we handle those things? And it is cyber. Right now, based on the definitions that we're saying, there's no cyber exclusion in there. So when you get a claim in from Illinois saying that, wait a minute, my personal data has been let out there and you're not allowed the biometric data. It's against the law to share it and to store it in Illinois. So all of a sudden you get a claim on your D&O policy for that. It should be a cyber claim. We're looking at going, wait a minute, this coverage is a lot broader. So in the 25 years we've been doing it, all we've been doing is looking at the claims year in and year out and trying to determine, wait a minute, either A, we need more money, B, we need higher deductibles, or we need less coverage. And we've been fortunate because what we've been doing is just growing with the marketplace. So as COVID goes, we have to increase our premium. The premium is still way too low for D&O. For $2,000 for $1 million in coverage, it is not a lot of money. And historically, our claims that used to be $10, $20, $30,000 are now $60, $70, $100,000. I've seen more $1 million claims in the past year than I've ever seen. And I got one in this morning, just $1 million claim. So yes, right now, D&O is really critical and it's really important, but you got to have a D&O that makes sense. So, okay, I guess I've done that part. All right, let's go to the next slide there, Jake. Let's have some fun and talk about the claims itself. All right, Eric, why don't you jump in on these?
Yeah, sure. So, I just want to talk about, just a couple to start. Um, Ones that are really important to have in your policy, or what claims that actually happen. So you need to make sure that they're covered under your policy. Um, let's just get started. So the first is going to be your breach of fiduciary duty. Obviously that's the biggest part of this pie. That's what makes, that's what D&O is truly for. Every D&O policy you should encounter should have this type of coverage. But, the next ones I want to talk about are going to be ones that are not always covered, but they're just as important. As Jake and Steve had mentioned, discrimination claims, something that happens all the time. This is something that every association, and I mean, every association is going to see at some point in their existence. They may not file a claim, they may not do anything with it, but it's definitely going to be something they're going to see at some point in their existence. Somebody is going to eventually buy into an association that wants to do something that they're not allowed to do, or there'll be somebody who's physically cannot do something or cannot use the facilities to the fullest extent that they should, and that's what leads to these type of issues. That's where I would like to have a dog. I cannot allowed to have a dog. You're discriminating against me because I need X. And you'll see in the next slide, we're getting into some claims examples. So I don't want to give away, what we're going to be talking about. But those are the type of issues you see. Or for example, if you are disabled and in a wheelchair and there's a pool, but there's no wheelchair lift to get you into the pool, I cannot enjoy the pool the same way everybody else does. You're discriminating against me. Therefore, I'm going to sue you. You know, so those are the type of issues that come, and you need to make sure your D&O policy has that. These next two are extremely important because they're ones that are, I mean, they're important because they're ones that are usually not covered by other D&O policies, even the nonprofit D&O policy is a insured versus insured. And we spoke about how, Steve talked about how most of or all, condo boards are volunteer based. So usually what happens is that, you know, the reason why this is important is because most organizations don't have boards that change. Like I said, ours in our space are always frequently rotating because they're volunteers. And there'll be times, as we spoke about before, where the new board doesn't agree with the situations that the old board has made. And therefore, they will sue the old board for decisions that they made that they didn't agree with. And in reality, 9 times out of 10, that new board would have made the same decision those old board would have made at that time. But because they're the new board, they're like, you know what? That was them. That was their problem. We're going to don't yell at us for doing that. That was their issue. We can sue them for making those, decisions that they made that we didn't agree with. And the other one that we just spoke about was the breach of contract. This is something that is extremely important. Obviously, that's not an indemnity type situation. It's more of a defense. You don't want to pay. No insurance policy is going to pay for I don't pay my vendor, so the insurance policy will pay for them. But as you know, tons of vendors are all doing work on the premises for insureds, or tons of vendors are on the premises of associations regularly, which means they enter into a variety of contracts. And as you know, as anybody on, this call has dealt with contractors, sometimes they don't appreciate the work that has been done. Maybe they think that the work isn't completely finished, but the contractor is saying that it is done. That's where these type of issues can really, that's where you really need to have make sure that breach of contract is something that is covered for defense of the association. So that's kind of the ones that I wanted to get into because those are the ones that I feel like are very important for condo specific issues and the ones that are usually not covered under other D&O policies and can really show you that if you don't have those, you're severely missing out.
Let me add a couple more in there. Like, first of all, you got to understand that you look at that list there. The bulk of those lists are non-monetary damage type claims. So when you have violation of the CCNRs, which conditions the violation of the rules, most of those things are, and these are the ones I hate more than everything in the world. These are the kind of situation I hate because there's rules. And you have people in there who either A, don't like to obey the rules, or, which is worse, these are people who go out and say the board's not enforcing the rules properly. My favorite ones is a trash can. The people are like trash cans out. They've been out for 48 hours. It's been 3 days now. It's been 4 days now. And boy, you're not doing anything about it. So there's these rules out there that people just, or guess what? The budget, you haven't sent the budget in a timely manner. And I'm going to, and then they like to just file a claim. They file a claim because the board, in their mind, the board is incompetent or the board is dishonest. And so we're starting to see a lot of claims there. Again, I like to call them post-COVID claims because post-COVID claims means we're together more and we just don't like each other. And because we don't like each other, and Steve said earlier, the angry. So we have a bunch of angry people out there and they're looking at rules and saying either A, you're not abiding by the rules, or B, you're not following the rules of the board. And that means I'm going to have a claim made against you. So if you look at a lot of these claims on here, they're not covered because they are non-monetary damage claims. So if you have a policy that says suit for damages, guess what? You don't have suit for damages. You have angry unit owners who's saying to the board members, guess what? You towed my car away. You say I can't have a pet. Whatever it is, they breach their fiduciary duty because they're incompetent. Defamation and harassment was not even on a list 5 years ago. It has reached up there. That is because, guess what? Everybody can be harassed. Only certain groups of people can be discriminated against. You got race, creed, color, religion, everything else. But guess what? Everybody can be bullied and harassed. And so if everybody can be bullied and harassed, guess what happens? Boom, that thing shot right up there. I didn't have a category for that 4 or 5 years ago. Breach of contract is there because we have a lot of angry people who said, guess what? The landscaper did not trim the trees, didn't show up that day, missed in front of my parking spot. And instead of them calling landscaper up and saying, come back out here, what the board says, oh, you're at it again, you're a nuisance. And we have a lot of nuisance claims. So people out there who just nuisance, and guess what? The board refused to do something about these people who are nuisance, and now all of a sudden there's a D&O claim. Just because you're a nuisance doesn't mean you can't do, they're not right. And that's what creates this kind of problem. So when we talk about these claims, a lot of them are not covered in your standard D&O policy. So you have to make sure that you have a policy. These are all the claims that we receive. These are all the kind of things that we paid defense costs on. Not some settlements, but most of the defense costs. EPLI, employment practice, is probably the only, right? I mean, I can say we've got their damages on EPLI. I don't see many damages on breach of fiduciary duty. You breach of fiduciary duty because you didn't do what? You didn't pass the assessments. You didn't have, your assessments are too high. You have a reserve study, but you didn't take care of the reserve study. These are the things that we see daily. I'm challenging the old board because the old board had a reserve study and ignored it. Now we have special assessment. These things used to be $10,000, $15,000 claims. Now they are $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 claims. This is the problem in D&O, and it's a problem that we have to deal with on a daily basis to figure out how do we keep a policy like this together and make it available, not only just today, for the future? Now, Eric's more concerned about than I am, just like Steve. They're pushing me aside like Steven to have special projects to do. So that's us right now. Okay, let's go to some sample claims. All right, guys, you guys can jump in. I know you're biting it out there, Steve.
Yeah. Let me start with the emotional support animals. Since I'm not sure how many claims you're saying, but we see a lot as a backdrop to this. People who have pets, and Jake and I are both pet owners with Jake's dog, Digby Marcus, even has a Facebook page. And one year in our town of Easton was voted as one of the 50 most powerful people in Easton. But he's an 18-pound pug. So it was unusual, and he had to try hard to make that list. But so you have a pet, you bring the pet in. The board, the documents have a no pet restriction. They send you letters, you ignore them. You then get to the point where the association says, well, now we're going to have our attorneys chase you because you have to get rid of the pet. You've ignored all our letters. You haven't come up with any reason as to why you have it. And at that point, inevitably, the unit owner goes to an attorney who says, aha, I'm wondering if this is really an emotional support animal. Now, keep in mind, we are very aware that most people who have emotional support animals truly have the need for them. So the cases that upset our boards and upset our associations are the ones where we think somebody might be gaming the system. That well, gee, we had a year and a half of letters and fines and everything else, and nobody said anything about emotional support animals. Then the attorney sends a letter, and the next thing we get is some therapist in Missouri. Not that there's anything wrong with Missouri, though you should note that they did lose the Super Bowl in Kansas City this year to the Eagles. And you're looking at it and saying, what is this? And there have been emotional support animal mills that have come up where in 20 minutes, I applied for one, and probably because I need emotional support, but within an hour, I had a certification back from a licensed social worker that I needed an emotional support animal. You can't really ask about what the disability is, but so there's a narrow focus, and people are saying, well, gee, maybe there's some cases where the Missouri therapist really and truly talked to this person, treated them as a patient, and came out with that determination. But it gets boards upset that there are these mills out there that may be coming up with some cases where there really was no investigation as to whether the person had a disability, and then everybody goes to war. And these are difficult cases for associations. They often lose if they fight them, but we see a lot, and that's just a very, very common claim. I don't know, Kevin and Eric, how often you're seeing.
Let me add something to it. Okay. What creates a problem for us in these emotional support animals that don't become a problem until they become a problem. meaning that we had a emotional support squirrel. So the squirrel was okay until it became aggressive. So also you see a lawsuit where the squirrel was overly aggressive. They had overly aggressive squirrel that ended up being an emotional support animal. Or we had our famous potbelly pig, where the board of directors said that it's not a support animal, it was lunch. So and those are kind of things that we see is that, or like right now, you have, again, we have this post-COVID world. You have a emotional support animal that becomes a problem because people went back to work and the dog is barking. So we're seeing these claims come out where they are okay, these pets are okay until something happens. And again, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon here, and we're trying to do a webinar, and all of a sudden we hear the dog barking across because guess what? The owner is at work now, where he was home for 3 years and now he has to go back and work. So now all of a sudden we complain about it, and now the board has to do something about it. And that's what creates the problems in there. And so they have to go out and find a person from Missouri, the emotional support animal. And that's what we see the bigger problem is right now, is that people complaining that the animal they have is something's wrong with them. And all of a sudden they have to go and deal with these different issues. So yes, we see these a lot, see them a lot. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And keep in mind as well that discrimination claims are the defense is provided, not the indemnification, not the judgment. So boards, the legal expenses are a big part of these claims, and that's huge that the defense is provided. But the boards have to be aware that it's against public policy to provide insurance for the discrimination for the actual judgment. So be careful that you know where there's coverage and where it may end. And again, also make sure whether you have one of the good policies or one of the package policies that may not be as good. And there are a few carriers that have decent, good D&O policies as part of their packages, but more often than not, the $200 policy is not that great. And I guess the way to look at it is in a 100-unit condominium, 200 units versus 2,000 units. Yeah, it's an $1,800 difference. But as attorneys, we don't look at that. We look at, well, gee, they're suing you for $500,000. If we don't zealously defend the claim, it's the concern about how are you going to go to the unit owners and say, we have a $500,000 judgment that the owners have to pay. And that's where you want the protection of the D&O policy. It's for the judgment, and the premiums, as Kevin said, are probably pretty low for what they cover. But anyway, keep that.
Yeah. Let me add something. Let me add something that's really important about the judgment. If there's a judgment, what happens is, and Eric mentioned earlier, if you have, like, our claims people specialize in community associations. So when the claim comes in, they will do a job. Okay, they will do that job and say, guess what? There's discrimination happening right now. We need to settle this case. Okay, but in settling, what we'll do is go back to the insured and say, listen, you actually discriminated. You did a job, so we're going to settle, and we're going to say that you have to pay a part of that loss. Okay, we're going to settle it. We'll get it settled, but you're going to participate in the loss. Or they're going to say, guess what? This is one of those situations where, you know what, we're seeing the preponderance of the evidence discrimination, but we're going to settle it now because we think it's in our best interest to settle it. So what we do is make sure that we have the attorneys that understand community associations, and that we may need to settle this right now because the association it can get worse, and we'll settle it. But we will charge the community association back. We will make sure the community association has to pay that $100,000, and so it can get complicated. but you got to make sure you work well with your attorney who's handling it and the carrier. You know, if it's a carrier you don't understand, attorney you don't understand, you may end up having to pay a couple $100,000 out of your pocket, as opposed to work with somebody who will say, we'll take care of it. That makes sense.
And I
And
think,
it's important to know that there are exclusions to these policies.
Mhm.
So there are cases where you are going to be insurance doesn't necessarily cover anything that ever happens. So you have to know what is covered, what's not covered. This is not your $2,000 doesn't give you a blank check to just do anything crazy because you hate some of the neighbors, maybe with good reason, but you have to give some thought to all policies have insurance, whether it's for have exclusions, whether it's for mold, whether it's for terrorism, war, etc. Not everything's going to be covered, but by and large, the kind of claims that we see come in are generally things that do have some coverage provided. Do you want to go into other claims?
Yeah.
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
Kevin or Eric, do you want to, or Jake, do you
Yeah,
want to touch
you know,
on
I tell you one that. Oh, Jay, go ahead. You can go and jump in.
no, that's okay. So before I get into that, just the point that Stephen mentioned, it ties into what Eric was getting at earlier, with the most common exclusions can be an uninsurable item. So for example, a lot of these have to do with, a lot of the examples we have on this page have to do with the board affecting the value of someone's asset, their unit. And what the second one you see after the emotional support is fails to fund reserves and unit owner brings a claim that his or her unit decreases 100,000. We'll see it come across as a breach of fiduciary duty claim because saying the board failed to adequately fund reserves, which after the Surfside collapse in Florida, that has affected the reserve studies, reserve requirements across the nation. And what we'll see is that an exclusion may be, oh, well, you know, it could be an uninsurable item that affected someone's unit value may not be a direct kind of breach of fiduciary duty. So I think you'll see a lot of exclusions kick in. But yeah, I mean, you might see something generally with these types of claims. It affects the value, and someone who is maybe angry with a unit owner, angry with a board member, they may go after the board directly and try to file this claim. So just something to keep in mind as far as what the kind of intention and kind of thought process is. And I did insurance defense, general insurance defense, at the start of my career. I think you would agree, Kevin and Eric, that when you're working on these types of claims, it's probably better to have someone who knows condo law rather than a general insurance defense attorney.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. And again, going to this one situation here, we see claims and forget the value of the unit decrease. It's just board failed to fund the reserve, and as a result of funding reserves, we want to kick out the board. We want new board members, so we want a new election. So we're seeing, especially it's interesting. We're seeing a lot of election disputes now, as a result of boards fail to fund the reserves, fail to pass special assessment, to have the budget right, insurance rates are too high. So now we see a lot of election disputes as a result. So what you're talking about here in terms of decrease by $100,000, we see the non-monetary damage. In fact, I don't think I ever seen a claim like this where they actually tied a damage amount to it, that they lost money. This goes back to, we want another election. The board we have is incompetent. They failed to properly fund the reserve. We want another election. So that one. Now, I know we run out of time.
Are you talking on a federal level or with community associations?
No, the community association itself, the unit
okay.
owners. Yeah, the unit owners are upset because one unit owner is upset because the board failed to fund the reserve. And I want to be on the board because if I'm president of the board, guess what? We'll take care of all that stuff.
And we call them, maybe everybody calls them coups, but yeah, there are takeovers, there are angry owners. Now you take Florida, where and New Jersey has done the same thing, but post Surfside had maybe it was mainly general liability claims, but I think there was some D&O contribution there.
Yeah.
But it settled for $1.2 billion.
Mhm.
A story for another day is that 547 million was for the concierge company, the security company. I believe paid $547 million because there was a state-of-the-art notification system that would have notified first responders and all the residents. And there was a 7-minute period where the attorney swimming in from across the country representing the plaintiffs, the 98 people killed, the estates, said you had 7 minutes where if you had hit the buttons, all these people would have been notified and some could have gotten out and you could have saved some lives.
Wow.
Now the security person was probably paid $8 an hour, and it was at 1 o'clock in the morning, did what I would have done. She ran out of the building. And for a long time, I was trying to figure out, why did the security company pay $547 million? That's my understanding. I don't know if you've heard anything else, Kevin, but based on claims like that, there are just these claims in our minds are, as Kevin said, are not just going to 70 or 80 or $100,000 claims. In some cases, they're going into the millions. And but maybe you can talk about, you were going to give another example, Kevin?
Yeah, I want to go through that third one because we're getting more calls about this failure to maintain insurance. Because right now you have all these associations who can't get insurance, and now you have them, you get sellers, and you have historically, the D&O policy had what's called a failure to maintain insurance exclusion on it. So any claim that came in about failure to maintain insurance exclusion has been excluded. And it still is on a lot of policies. Some policies don't have them anymore. So if you don't have a failure to maintain insurance exclusion on the policy, something like this, if the board is sued because they fail to maintain adequate insurance, it depends on what the cause of loss. If they say, as a result, the building can't be repaired, then that's a property damage. But if they say, as a result, we have a special assessment, that's a different story. That may be covered under the D&O policy. Yep. So it's a really tricky one, that one is, in terms of, does the board get covered when a claim is made against that board because they did not carry enough insurance? It's going to depend. That's what it's really going to depend.
And the example to give to make this so that it's not like winning the lottery is you can't insure your building for $1 million if it's supposed to be insured for 100 million by tons of D&O insurance. And say, well, we had an $80 million loss when we only had $1 million of insurance. That's just stupidity. That you can't just underinsure the building on purpose and think that the insurance, D&O insurance, covers that type of claim. It's the loss of the sale or something along those lines, not that you don't have to buy property insurance and Kevin's going to pay you everything. But with that said, I think we have a couple of questions that Sherry might want to shoot to you, Kevin and Eric.
Yes, they're coming in fast and furious, which is great. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. And we've been going over fantastic information here regarding D&O and claims. Kevin, we have a question from Kate Rooney. The question is, does history of election dispute have any effect on rating or coverage eligibility?
Well, okay, if we see claims that had election disputes, yes. Well, I mean, if we have prior claims, it does raise the rate. However, what we're doing is seeing trends. What we do is evaluate trends and say, oh, here's a trend out here where, again, it follows the country. You live in a community association where we're a 50-50 country where 10%, 20%, half people don't like the other half. You're going to have disputes. You're going to have election disputes. And what we need to do is we have to monitor and say, okay, how much rate has to go up in order to cover those claims before we start putting deductibles on there and before we start putting exclusions on there. And that's where we're at.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And Patsy Penn, thank you so much, Patsy. She has sent in 3 questions. Patsy, her first question is, so if a board fails to fully fund the reserve, what does the carrier pay on the claim? Is it the amount that should have been reserved?
I'm asking the lawyer the question, but I say from my point of view, it is we defend it, and guess what? I mean, the lawyer's job, Steve Marcus' job, is go in there and defend it and say the board did the best job it can do. We can't give you insurance, not there to provide you more. In other words, we can't give you something that you don't really have. We can't give you an advantage you're not legally entitled to. So we can't say, here's money. We can defend it, and that's about the extent. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, again, I mean, the D&O policy provides something, but if the reserve should have been $3 million, and they're not fully funded, I don't think D&O insurance was ever, or any kind of insurance,
No.
was intended to insure that loss. I think it's to back up the board in terms of the making a sound business decision, knowing that they could have reserves, but they could also get association loans and assessments. And but I don't think the insurance was ever intended to pay the amount that the reserve should have been, because I think across the country that most associations are not 100% funded for reserves, and everybody would be seeking these claims to get the difference that should have been. And the other thing is, even if it were the case, the amount of the reserves, each unit owner only would be one. The unit owner should have been contributing to those reserves, so they get a windfall if you pay them because they should have been. And if there's 100 units, those reserves would have been funded by 100 people, not by the one defendant. So I agree with you that I don't think it goes, that D&O insurance, the good policies are good, but they're not
Everything.
everything. Yeah.
Mhm.
Any other questions, Sherry?
Yeah, we have a couple more from Patsy. Thank you so much, Patsy. Patsy also would like to know, how does the D&O handle election challenges? Just defense?
Election. Yeah, I would say. I mean, again, the election chat. When we say this is a legal question, I don't see anything more than there's no damages. How would you? Okay,
There's no
my question.
damages.
At the end of
I
the
agree with
day,
Kevin.
Yeah.
The election challenges is vague. I think that would get into if there's an election dispute as to counting percentage, whatever. I guess that would be injunctive relief that would be sought.
But what Kevin's saying is the person doesn't want money.
Yeah.
They want to be king of the condominium.
Yeah.
They want to be the board. They don't want the other people to be the board. So I'm not sure that I'm more than happy to. I'll give you my cell number if Patsy or anybody else wants to call me to go deeper into these questions. My number is 781-413-5226. And as Jake said,
you said it too fast. Say it slower.
781-413-5226. And Kevin, are you going to be calm? And as Jake said, Kevin and I no longer have anything to do now that we're being brought out to pasture. So we have plenty of time for your calls if you want to discuss it. But it's a good question. That's the top of the hour. Here's what we promise everybody in attendance is anybody who registers, you'll get a link to the webinar. You'll get a copy of the PowerPoint, and you'll get questions, answers to the questions that either were answered now or the ones that we didn't get to. And you probably should get that Monday or probably Tuesday. So look for that in your email. And as I said, if you have questions, by all means, call us. Jake's putting up our email addresses. Email us, and I hope that everybody got.
Hey, Steve, there's one question in there that's kind of important and everybody would like to probably know about. That
Sure.
last question, Sherry, do you see that one in there about
I
the
do. The premium of the factors, the premium is based on for D&O, that one?
No, no, not that one.
Oh.
They're asking about should board members be named under the policy? Okay. That was historically, we used to get a list of board members. It might have been in the chat more so. They used to have a list of board members. We used to get them. Now we don't anymore. It's really say that the current board, the past board, and future board members. So they all are collectively. So you don't have to name them. You have to list them or anything like that. It is just all board members. So that answers that question.
And wouldn't that, I think there's also another topic we could discuss is should a manager or additional named insured be included?
Yeah. Why don't you say what KDIS does, what some similar policies do, versus maybe what the package policies do? Is the property manager named? Is the property manager named for an additional premium? How does that all work with you and the few good D&O policies that are out in the marketplace?
Yeah, go ahead,
so I
Eric.
think, yeah, no, I
These are
think
great
that,
questions.
yeah. So for us, and the way we do it is that the property managers so I guess you have to separate it for crime and then cyber and D&O. So under a good D&O policy, like ours, a property manager is already covered automatically. It's not something you have to add. We don't have to change the name or anything like that. So obviously property managers will change, throughout the course of a life of an association. It's usually not the same one for, 20 years.
Yeah.
So we can usually just, on the D&O side, it's usually just they're covered under the definition of the policy. So when you're reading the definition of insured person under our policy, the property manager is under there.
And that's a big deal because the management contract very likely is to say that the managers just that they're always going to get named because they're in the wrong place at the wrong time. If they happen to be the manager, then an attorney is going to name them in a demand along with the board. So the automatic coverage is great. I know in the past, maybe you and others were doing $75, $150 to add them, but a wonderful thing if it's now automatic. And I'm assuming you were going to go into the crime and the designated agent. So
Oh yeah, so I was
endorsement.
gonna say, yeah, just so on crime, you definitely have to add, we at least the way our policy works is that you have to be notified, like you let us know, hey, look, this is the property manager, and we usually add them up to the limit of what the association, carries for their, A1 limit, which is their employee theft. A cyber kind of works the same way. You usually have to add them via endorsement. Usually those ones cost, they're not too much money, $200, $300, if that, you know what I mean? But for the most part, they do have to be added, but the D&O is definitely automatic.
My final question, you're mentioning cyber, and that's probably, I see that as a huge area of exposure that probably community associations and lots of businesses are not getting the coverage for.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any statistics like what percentage of, I mean, even if you made a guess as what percentage of associations are getting cyber coverage, because I'm not sure that everybody understands that if you don't have it, you're not going to have any coverage and it's going to come out of pocket.
Yeah, you know what? I think, Jake, you should put this on your calendar to do a cyber seminar. Because right now, the number one claim that we're seeing across the country is social engineering. It is by far. And we're seeing it more and more where the property managers are getting these bills from the landscapers or the roofers and saying, please pay now to avoid any late fees. Here's my new bank and routing number. And so they send money out, and all of a sudden, a month later, they call up, say, hey, I haven't got my payment this year. Yes, you did. So, oh, I didn't tell you we were hacked. So we're seeing that more and more and more and more and more. So cyber policy, cyber coverage is really important right now. Not so much for the things like the data breaches. We don't see that too much anymore because our stuff's all out there, but it's just the loss of reserve account, operating accounts, just the money we're seeing that's being from social engineering I would say, put us in a few months from now to do a cyber. We're glad to do a cyber one for you.
That'd be great. I remember as cybersecurity was becoming more of a issue, a more pressing issue, it was the policies, including cyber insurance, were incredibly dense and
Yeah.
technical. So I'm sure there's a lot more that's developed since the last time I've kind of had to dig in on one of those. So that's a good suggestion. I love it.
And I would leave it on the cyber of one, get the coverage and understand that it's not covered, but do what the attorneys who do loan closings, like for people buying houses and all that, put something either on your automatic reply, or if you ever get, if anybody ever gets wiring instructions from you, have something stating, please call us to make sure that the wiring instructions are legitimate, because sadly we're finding that that's how people are getting scammed, is somebody's coming in with all the information and saying, versus sending $1 million to the attorney, here's our new wiring instructions, and then nobody sees the money anymore. So yeah, that maybe Kevin and Eric and Jake can do this like weekly webinars, but we would love to do a cyber webinar with you a little bit down the road. And
Okay.
we really appreciate Eric, Kevin, and Sherry for all you did today, and for your preparation and all that kind of stuff. We wish you luck again on your 25th anniversary. And for anybody on the call, you know how to contact us. And Kevin and Eric, if you have any questions that you didn't think I'd answer today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
We
you guys,
appreciate it.
everybody.
Thank you
Thanks
for
a lot.
having us. Thank you.
Mhm.